Value podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition their business on their terms. Our mission was born from the lessons we've learned from over 100 business transactions, which fuels our desire to share our experiences and wisdom so you can succeed. Now here's your host, CEO of Mastery Partners, Tom Bronson.
Hi, this is Tom Bronson, and welcome to Maximize Business Value, a podcast for business owners who are passionate about building long-term sustainable value in their businesses. In this episode, I'd like to welcome our guest, Greg Stanley. He's the president of Accelerant Consultants. That's a consulting business with the mission to help small and medium-sized companies unlock their growth potential by optimizing their revenue functions, creating more new sales opportunities, and increasing their valuations, something we love to hear on Maximize Business Value. I met Greg last year by an introduction from a mutual friend who's a member of Business Navigators, that servant leadership organization based here in Dallas that I frequently talk about. When I was recently talking with Greg about his business, kind of the pieces of the growth puzzle started coming together for me. If you're passionate about growing your business, then this is the podcast for you. And if you're not passionate about growing your business, then you should stay tuned anyway, because by the end of this podcast, you'll be convinced that growth is really, really important to business value. So welcome to Maximize Business Value. Greg, how are you today?
Tom, I'm great. I really appreciate you having me. I've appreciated our conversations that we've had in the past and really feel like we've got a lot of synergy in the way we go to the market and help small and mid-sized business owners. So I'm hoping that your listeners and viewers can get at least a few tidbits out of today's discussion.
I think that they will find that you are as passionate about helping business owners as I am. So that's exciting to have you. So tell us a little bit about Accelerant Consultants.
Yeah, Accelerant Consultants, as you said, was founded about 4 years ago with a mission of helping small and mid-sized business owners optimize their revenue function in a way that maximizes valuation. And I really saw a market opportunity because I saw a lot of small and mid-sized business owners operating in a way that didn't necessarily maximize valuation or didn't even take valuation necessarily into consideration. And knowing that there will be an exit event at some point, there always is, it's something that I thought was really important in a market niche that I could help fill given my background.
That's awesome. You said a mouthful there. Every business on the planet will ultimately transition. Our listeners hear that frequently from me. It's a foregone conclusion. And so you should be thinking about your business value as you run your business. So what is your background and why did you start Accelerant?
Yeah, I had spent about 25 years building and growing marketing and sales organizations, participating in organizational strategy, being involved in transactions and valuations. And it started with a company that was doing about $1 million in revenue. Right out of college, I was the 10th employee. By the time I left 10 years later, we were doing $500 million in revenue. So explosive growth and a lot of opportunities to just sort of figure things out within the context of the business and build new businesses within the business. Went to work for PwC, the Big Four accounting firm, and helped them in a couple of different contexts build and grow marketing and sales functions inside the organization and help them go to market in a bit of a different way in the areas where I was responsible. And I again saw an opportunity with small and mid-sized business owners who largely came from backgrounds that weren't in marketing and sales. They weren't probably in organizational strategy. They were sheet metal fabricators, or they were technologists, or they were whatever their engineers or scientists or whatever their background happened to be, where they came up with a great idea. They had a great business mission. They tried to grow the business and ultimately believed they could scale by hiring a sales team and developing a revenue function without necessarily a lot of strategy behind it. And so helping them execute both on the strategy and the execution of the strategy was an area where I just felt like I could provide a lot of value. And you get to a certain point in your career and you're looking for a bit of intrinsic value in making your mark on the world or the business world as you start to wind things down. And I saw a great opportunity to do that.
Wow, that is explosive. So you were like employee number 10 at that company, and then next thing you know, it's a $500 million business, right? So was it still a 10 employee business at the time?
Yeah.
I'm guessing not.
Somebody was
I'm
doing a lot
guessing
of
not. Well, you said a mouthful. The a lot of times we take action without thinking about strategy and what the it's kind of that it's instead of ready, fire, aim, it's fire, 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 ready, and then think about aiming later when it comes sometimes to sales strategy and growth and things like that. So it's so important to have a clear strategy in place. In our conversations, we've talked about three things that I think might be a little confusing to our audience. So let's kind of peel that onion a little bit. You talk about revenue function optimization,
Mhm.
marketing consulting, and sales training. So what is the difference between these three animals?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of market confusion around all of the people that claim to be able to help grow your business. And it could be business strategists, it could be sales trainers, it could be marketing firms that want to launch a digital marketing campaign. It could be revenue function optimization firms like myself. The challenge is, and what I see in terms of the market, is that each of these independently, while they may be helpful, don't necessarily address the root cause of the problem and don't necessarily address the problem holistically. So while an organization may certainly need marketing help or may need sales training at some point for their sales team, they need to understand how and why they're going to market, how they make money, and be able to then structure things around those concepts as opposed to just throwing money at marketing firms or sales training and put themselves in a position where they really optimize their entire investment around the revenue function.
Wow. In fact, it's interesting here, and I didn't point this out earlier. This is the first of a podcast of a series of podcasts on sales growth and that kind of thing. So it's really good to get that underpinning now, because you're absolutely right. As I think about the different businesses that are out there, there are, everybody can. Uh, Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of companies will claim to help you be able to grow your business, but they may be only handling one piece of the puzzle, right? And so it's sort of a complex thing, right?
Yeah, very much so. You need to address the entire continuum, going back really to the mission of the organization, why they're in business, and how they fill a unique market need or market niche, and do so in a way that's differentiated from their competition and in a way that drives profitable growth.
That's awesome. So you talked about kind of one of those components is the sales training, but um, I've seen just as much probably ineffective sales training as I have seen effective sales training. So why is it that sales training often doesn't work?
Yeah, I would say it's probably a couple of reasons. The first is really more a function of the continuum that generally happens in small and mid-sized businesses. What will happen oftentimes is you'll have a business owner who will grow the business to a certain point. They'll assume that they can scale the business by hiring a sales team and allowing salespeople to do what they do, which is go out on the market and sell. They effectively do that without any mission in mind, without any guidance in terms of who they should sell to or how to build profitable revenue or what a value proposition is, all of those things that are really necessary in terms of being effective in the marketplace. And they'll make the assumption that the sales team just isn't any good and they need training. And so I'm going to send them off to sales training. And oftentimes the sales training is guided around how you pick up the phone and make a cold call, or how you get a meeting scheduled, or words and phrases to use, or taking a customer centric view of the world. They tend not to be very sustainable. People tend to fall into the habits that they've had before without that organizational reinforcement. And they tend to be fairly canned sales training that you go into a room with a whole bunch of other people and they train everybody the same, regardless of what their skills gaps are, regardless of what the organization does or what industry they're in. And in a lot of cases, if you look at the profiles of those delivering the sales training, they haven't themselves necessarily been overly successful in sales or business development or organizational leadership, or areas where you really need some effectiveness. You need some experience to be effective.
So Wow. I'm just trying to just even peel that whole onion apart there because um, where do I even start with this? I apologize. Normally you don't catch me off guard like that, but it's that whole sales training in a can, right? Is what we're talking about here that might not be effective. I see over and over and over in businesses where they really haven't defined their market. What is their niche? All right, we sell X and we sell it to restaurants.
Right.
So go out and just sell this product to restaurants. Well, what types of restaurants, right? I mean, there's 500,000 restaurants in America, dwindling right now. I get it, but which restaurants are we focused on? Which restaurants are we good at? Which restaurants do our products really work well with? Rather than kind of taking that whole shotgun approach, you're taking a more rifle approach and zeroing in on the target as opposed to firing the shotgun into the air and hoping a BB lands on the right porch, right? So it's got to be a focused approach with a strategy kind of behind it. I love where you're going with that. You in our conversations, you've compared building an effective revenue function to a military operation.
Yeah.
All right. I love that. Tell me more.
Yeah, and I certainly don't want to give the impression that selling and military operations are of the same import and you've got the same consequences. But I think from a process perspective, there are a lot of lessons there to be learned. And really, one of the key themes that we'll talk about today is the theme of intentionality. So if you think about an operation like D-Day, for example, and you think about how that would have worked if there was really no defined mission, if there were really no defined objectives, if the soldiers hadn't been well trained and weren't equipped with weapons, and there was no organization to it and no leadership oversight to it, and the soldiers were left to their own devices to choose what beaches they landed on and how they got there and what they captured after they landed there, it would have been a miserable failure. Military operations start with a mission. What's the mission we want to accomplish? What are the objectives we want to accomplish within the mission? And how do we ultimately achieve the larger goal by achieving smaller goals in the interim? How do we train our soldiers in a way that they're going to be effective in the field? How do we give them the right weapons that once they're in the field, they're going to be effective? How do we get them to the right places via transportation and logistics? That's the reason those missions work. And that's the reason D-Day, for example, worked. It was highly coordinated. There was a very well-defined mission and objectives. The soldiers had the right weapons. They knew exactly why they were there and what they were doing, and it worked. However, most business operators or most business owners operate in a way that they don't necessarily define the mission. They don't clue the sales team in on why they're there, what the greater mission is, what their value proposition is. They don't necessarily give them tools. They don't integrate the marketing function with sales. They don't give them a value proposition that's effective and compelling and differentiating. They just say, go out and sell, which is tantamount to having a military mission where you say, go out and capture stuff. And it just doesn't work. So it's, again, certainly not of the same import, but I think there are some lessons to be learned in terms of the process and the approach that can be very applicable.
You don't think that works? Just go out and capture some stuff and bring back whatever you find, right?
Typically not, but it's amazing how many business owners actually operate their sales or revenue organizations in a way where that's effectively what they're doing, whether they know it or not.
One of the things that we do when we assess a business is to ask, have you defined your unique selling proposition or your value proposition, right? And I can tell instantly by the way the owner answers that question, if they're hemming and hawing, then, but they ultimately come up with a response. Say, well, what if I go and ask your sales team? Would I get exactly that answer?
Right.
Or are they going to fumble around and try and figure out what it is in their mind and state it as well? If you as a business owner haven't defined that value proposition, then how do you expect your salespeople to be able to articulate the value proposition to the customer? So great. That is, of course, clearly one of the weapons, one of the tactics, that you would use in that sales assault that the folks are going out there. I love that analogy. I'm going to probably steal it from you at some point, but I'll give you credit for it. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and don't for a minute think that that selling is not just as important as the military. So I've got a lot of friends in the military, and we appreciate everything that they do. So
Yeah.
how should a business owner make the most of their marketing spend as a part of their go-to-market strategy? And for our business owners, marketing spend, of course, are the dollars you invest in your marketing. So how should they make the most of their marketing spend as a part of their go-to-market strategy?
Yeah, and I'll go back to the theme of intentionality. Marketing spend needs to be made with a high degree of intention and an expectation of an outcome. And what I find is a lot of business owners, number one, haven't defined their value proposition well. So they're not necessarily sure what to tell the marketing firms to go do other than develop a website, develop a logo, and do some branding and do a digital ad campaign or whatever they have them do. But they need to make sure that they've got a clearly defined, differentiated, and compelling value proposition that they can then arm the marketing organizations with. They need to make sure that they're not I call it sprinkling brand dust. So they invest a little bit in a table at a not-for-profit event, and they run an ad in a magazine, and they have a speaking engagement at a conference, and they put a booth up at a trade show, and they do a lot of stuff and things and they cross their fingers and frankly hope that it results in business. They don't track it. They don't have an expectation for it. They don't integrate it with the sales team. And so with a lack of those things, the marketing spend is largely wasted in most organizations if those things aren't done and aren't done with a high degree of intentionality and, again, expectation of outcome.
So again, another nugget there, sprinkling brand dust. As everyone who listens to this podcast knows, I've bought or sold 100 businesses in my career. So I've operated a lot of businesses. And one of the first things I ask when we're thinking about budgeting and going forward as it relates to marketing is, what's the ROI on our marketing efforts? How do we get a return on investment there? And probably one of the most egregious places where business owners don't think about what their return on investment is in the area of trade shows, right? I bought a company. They were doing 24 trade shows a year, admittedly small, kind of regional or state trade shows. And I said, well, what's the ROI on each of these? I said, what do you mean the ROI? I said, well, we're tracking our leads, right? How many deals are we closing? Where are we going? And well, no. This is all part of just kind of our branding. Now I have a term for that. That's sprinkling your brand dust, right? So I love that. I'm gonna use that one as well. I think we're gonna get a lot of things that I'm gonna be able to use here later on. We are talking with Greg Stanley. Let's take a quick break. Back in 30 seconds.
Like it or not, eventually you'll have to come to a point when it's time for your business to transition. Will you be ready? Will you be able to get the maximum value for your business? Brought to you by Mastery Partners, Mastery Class is a 12-month program designed specifically for business owners. We meet once a month as a group to work through our Transition Readiness Assessment. Expand your business toolbox through leadership presentations, have live interaction with other business owners. This program determines vulnerabilities in your business that will affect business value and your ability to transition in the future. Whether that transition is in 2 or 15 years, what you do now has long-term effects on the future value of your business. We have the know-how you need to get the results you want in your business to maximize business value. To learn more and secure your spot in the program, visit mbvmasteryclass.com. That's mbvmasteryclass, mastery with a Y, mbvmasteryclass.com.
We're back with Greg Stanley, president of Accelerant Consultants, a consulting practice that helps small and mid-sized businesses unlock their growth potential. So let's switch gears for a moment. I'd like to talk about how growth drives business value. So make no mistake, a growing business is always more valuable than a flat or declining business. Bonus points if you can tell me which. There is one area that a declining or a flat business might be more valuable. So bonus points to any of our listeners who can text or email me the answer to that question. But for 99.99% of businesses, a growing business is always more valuable than a flat or declining business. Now, as we already indicated in the first half, and I say it all the time, every business on the planet will transition. And we use the term business transition because after every business is going to transition, but that transition might look different. Some might call it exit planning, but we use transition because we explore kind of all the options a business owner has to ultimately exit their business, because that, at the end of the day, is what is eventually going to happen. So what are some of the things business owners should be thinking about doing with their revenue functions prior to transitioning their businesses?
Yeah, I would say there are a number of things or areas where I see business owners maybe falling a bit short or not really realizing their maximum value when they decide to take their business to market. And as you said, every business owner, whether they know it or not, they're going to have a transition. And sometimes it's driven by a family health event. Sometimes it's driven by, I've done this for 28 years and I'm just tired and I'm ready to get out. It could be driven by a strategic offer or private equity or wanting to do an ESOP and give their employees some ownership. Whatever the case may be, there will be a transition in your business. What you want to make sure you don't have happen is that transition be just closing the doors of the business, putting people out of work, not necessarily realizing any value from the asset that you spent probably many years growing. And so, again, back to the theme of intentionality, it's really important that the businesses operate with a high degree of intentionality and an understanding really of those levers that affect valuation. And so when you talk about those things that the business owners ought to be thinking about within the revenue function, you think about what makes your business sellable when and if you take it to market or when and if you get a strategic offer. There are a lot of business owners that I see get caught in the trap of doing stuff for money. And so they start out with a mission and they start out with a differentiated value proposition and they know how they're going to market, but they've got a house payment to make, they've got a payroll to make, they've got credit card bills to pay off, they've got kids in college, whatever their expense structure is, they develop it into a lifestyle business that just provides growth on top of growth, helps with the lifestyle, but from a strategic connectivity perspective, a lot of the services or products they provide become unrelated. And so that's not something that necessarily becomes sellable. A lot of business owners focus on growth for the sake of growth. And we want to grow 6% next year or 8% next year, pick your number. But again, it's not necessarily strategic growth. It can be with the same large client or customer that they have, which creates a revenue concentration issue that isn't going to be very attractive to those bidding on the business or wanting to buy the business at some point. They may be growing at a level that's not all that profitable, or not as profitable as the rates they've seen historically, or that are consistent with what their competitors are growing at in the marketplace. And so lower than market profitability, that's not a place you want to go, even if your top line is growing. All you're doing is creating more administration and more cost for the same amount of EBITDA, which is what your business value is largely going to be based on. It's going to be a multiple of your EBITDA, depending on your industry and your growth and your profitability of your business. So it's really, and one of the first white papers I wrote as a business owner was Growing the Right Way. It's not necessarily about purely the focus on growth, but it's focusing on growth in a way that will make your business marketable at some point in the future when that time comes.
You're blowing me away here. When I talk typically with sales folks, they're all about the growth, but they're not thinking about the exit strategy and how the growth impacts that. That is so important. What you mentioned here about growing the right way. Growth for growth's sake is not necessarily a good thing. If your top line is growing at 15%, but your bottom line is flat or declining or growing at a slower rate, that is, to me, a symptom of unhealthy growth. And so you've got to be able to evaluate that. And it's also alarming to me. I was having a conversation with someone the other day. It's alarming to me the number of of prospective clients or clients that we have, or business owners in general, that really can't measure the profitability of a customer or of a line item, and the SKU in the warehouse. And if you can't measure the profitability of that, then how do you know that selling more is going to be good, right?
Right.
If you can't, you don't, they don't measure the profitability of their sales reps, right? And those are things that, as we advise in business value, eliminate the unprofitable things. But if you don't know what those unprofitable things are, you're making a wild stab in the dark. So, wow, that is some great advice, and I love the fact that kind of all the different types of exit strategies, because I just don't hear that. So perk your ears up, folks. Listen up. We've got a guy here who knows about growth and understands the exit side of the business. What are some of the biggest mistakes business owners make prior to the exit?
Well, and I'm going to touch on the point that you just made, which was fantastic, Tom, around understanding where and how you make money. Many business owners don't really have a good handle on the products or services that they sell and which ones are making money and which ones aren't. Their top customers, which ones are making money and which ones aren't. I think a lot operate under the assumption that I'm a $20 million business owner. I've got one customer doing $20 million. That's a great customer. In aggregate, the business may be making money in spite of that $4 million customer, as opposed to because of that $4 million customer. And it allows you to shape the relationship in different ways. And the same goes for the salespeople. I try to encourage all of the clients that I take on to do a P&L on your top customers, so you really understand the ones that you can't lose and are strategic, and you're figuring out how to put controls and processes in place to retain that business and create growth within that business. The salespeople and their level of net new, truly incremental profit that they're bringing the organization, and also the products and services. So when you're making decisions, you're doing it based on an understanding of opportunity cost, and you're making a decision intentionally to invest in those things that are more, and those people that are more profitable, and de-investing in those things that are less profitable or unprofitable for your business.
So, I gave a story to someone recently around that whole line. So let me drive this home for our listeners. Bought a company in Chicago. It was about $33 million in revenue. But it was losing $3 million a year. So some of you might ask, why would you buy a company doing 33 million, losing $3 million a year? Because during our due diligence, I understood what the problem was. I was able to dissect the problem and knew that I could fix it pretty quickly. And I could also pick it up at a pretty decent value for me. So as it turns out, our $33 million business, our five largest customers were driving about 15 million in revenue, right? So it's a pretty large chunk. Almost 50% of our revenue was coming from our top five customers. Well, as it turns out, each one of those customers, we were underwater. We were not making money. In fact, we were losing money every time we sent a delivery to their dock. And so I called our sales team together and I said, okay, here are the top offenders. Let's go. We're going to go visit with each one of them, and we're going to have one of two outcomes. We're going to say, we need to renegotiate the contract, and here's why. And I'll be very open and honest with my financials. Or we're going to give them the ability to walk away because we can't service the contract the way it is. And of course, my salespeople gave me, well, you might say that it was slightly a revolt that was going on around those customers, because they were big customers. And the tail of the tape is, out of those five customers, we lost two of them. And we renegotiated three of them to get me to at least a break even, right? I wasn't trying to get too profitable here. I just needed to stop losing money. And we went from a $33 million business to a $28 million business, 33 million losing 3 million a year, to a $28 million business making $1 million a year overnight.
Well, and you
That's simple.
you make another good point there, Tom, in terms of oftentimes issues like that can be tracked to compensation. I'm a firm believer that people do what they're paid to do. And if you're paying your sales reps purely on top line revenue, you're setting up a structure where the sales rep can win and the organization can lose. And that's not the alignment that you're looking for in the business. So the compensation element can be very important in making sure that you're structuring the right types of behavior incentives to go after those clients or customers that are going to be meaningful from a profitability and a growth perspective to the business.
Yeah, anytime I've bought a company that uses a revenue driver for compensation, for sales compensation, I change it overnight to a gross profit compensation model, because it just doesn't make sense to pay sales reps based on revenue. And so you've got to know what the gross profitability is by product, by customer, so that you can pay them effectively. But look, we pay our salespeople not to go out there and bring in random dollars. We pay them to go out and bring in profit dollars, right? And so that's just another way of saying it. I'm glad you brought that up, because while you were talking about that, I was thinking about, man, sometimes we have some very unusual ideas about how we should be paying our salespeople. I think it's gross profit. Are there other things that I'm missing there, Greg?
You're absolutely right. It's gross profit, but my view and the counsel that I give to most of my clients is to pay a higher amount or a higher commission on those things that are most valuable to the business.
Right.
So it's not just on profit. It could be on percentage profit. It could be on the acquisition of net new clients versus growth in existing clients. Another mistake that I see a lot of business owners make is they'll pay on revenue that, if a salesperson wasn't in the seat they were in, would happen anyway. And that's not why you pay a sales team. You pay a sales team to create incremental growth. And it's with the assumption that they're doing that, and they're doing it through the acquisition largely of net new clients. That's a really valuable exercise, and you ought to pay your salespeople really well for doing those things. But paying salespeople to sit on top of revenue that would have happened regardless of whether they were in their seat or not creates an extra cost burden for the organization that can frankly be eliminated.
Yeah, great points all. So sometimes when I talk with business owners, they have a nice lifestyle business and no real kind of short-term plans to exit. Why should they do anything different from what they're doing today?
Yeah, I think that speaks to the lack of preparation that a lot of business owners put in this exit event that we talk about, that we all know is going to happen at some point. They don't want to disrupt the forward momentum of the business and the money that they're taking out of the business that affords them the ability to buy a lake house or buy a boat or send their kids to college or have no debt or buy a second vacation home in Florida, or whatever they happen to do. It's good income, and they don't want to necessarily rock the boat in terms of potentially putting some of that income at risk. While they're making that decision, though, again, back to the issue of opportunity cost, they are making intentionally the decision not to necessarily create a business that's more valuable once they choose to exit. The business, for the vast majority of business owners, is and should be the most valuable asset you ever have over the course of your life. You've generally spent years and years of blood, sweat, and tears building the business to the point where you can get out of the business, and you can do so in a way that's meaningful for yourself and your family and those you care about, and sometimes your employees if you're doing an ESOP. But ignoring the fact that you have an asset that you need to build the value of over time and make marketable and sellable at the end of the day, and just running the business to be able to take money out of the business is going to create a really disappointing end for a lot of people at some point.
Yeah, I don't even call it a lifestyle business, although that's the best descriptor of it. I say that those business owners that have that, they don't own an asset, they own a job.
Right.
The business owners that really think about their businesses as an asset, then would do anything that they can to protect the value of an asset, right? You've got a house and you want to protect the value of your house. You got a car, you want to protect that as much as you can, right? You've got stuff, you want to protect that stuff. Why is it that we think about businesses differently? And many times business owners, really what they've got is a job, which again goes to that sort of lifestyle thing. They own a job and not much more than that. So, man, we've gone a lot of different directions today, and I love what I hear you saying, and I'm confident that our listeners would benefit from having a conversation with you. But of course, as you know, your field is very crowded, right? What sets you apart from other growth strategy consultants?
I would say a couple of things. The experience in business strategy, the experience in transaction, the experience in building and growing revenue functions, a lot of times from the ground up, an understanding of those drivers of value within businesses and how to get organizations to focus very intentionally on those drivers of value, and to be able to handle all of that holistically. A lot of, as we talked about earlier, you get into a lot of firms that claim the ability to create growth in your business, but it isn't necessarily the right kind of growth. It doesn't necessarily even lead to growth. It's that really intentionality, understanding of the mission, and then making decisions that help you execute the mission to make your business more valuable, that I found to be, and the focus on valuation to be fairly unique in terms of the market offering.
I love that. I will say that is a very rare case, right? In the business that you are, you have differentiated yourself. You've got a great value proposition there. So one last business question, and that is, of course, this podcast is all about maximizing business value. And although we've touched on a lot of that stuff throughout the course of this podcast, what is the one most important thing that you recommend business owners do to build value in their business?
Yeah, I'm going to say two, and they're both related. Number one is understand the drivers of value in the business and what's going to make your business marketable at the end of the day. Whether you plan an exit or not, in the short term, you plan in the long term, you're at least giving yourselves options in the shorter term if you decide to get out of the business, or if you have a health event, or if you get a strategic offer, or if PE comes in and offers you a bunch of money. You're giving yourself options, and you're giving yourself the ability to maximize the take out of the business once you decide to exit. And then once you understand those value drivers, make sure that you make every decision within that business with a high degree of intentionality around those things that are accretive to that valuation. And I think a lot of business owners, whether it's launching a new product line, or whether it's sort of tolerating underperformance in certain areas, or not understanding where the profitability comes, and therefore not being intentional about the decisions that you make to drive value within the business. Every decision you make, you ought to go back to the mission of the business, and the mission of the business is to drive value.
I love that. We often say that having a great exit strategy kind of helps drive business strategy, and they should go hand to hand. Now, don't get me wrong, you shouldn't run a business by your exit strategy, right? But your exit strategy will give you clues to the things that you need to do in order to build that long-term value in the business. Two great answers. I appreciate that, but I'm not going to let you off the hook yet. Our longtime listeners know that we always ask the bonus question. And so here we are. People have been listening just to get the answer to this question, Greg. What personality trait has gotten you into the most trouble over the years?
I would say most trouble. I like to keep myself entertained, and sometimes that involves with family and friends stirring the pot a little bit, and being a bit of a practical joker, and just sort of sitting back and watching what happens after I feel the need to entertain myself. So I would say that's the one that's probably got me in the most trouble. I would say the one that has served me the best over time, not to necessarily force an expansion of your question, but the one that has served me the best over time, I sincerely think I got from my mother, who was a first grade teacher for a long time, and it's empathy. It's the ability to put myself in another person's shoes, whether it's a business owner or a potential client or an employee of the business, and be able to operate from different perspectives and make sure that I create the best possible outcomes I can create.
I'm glad to hear that you're a practical joker. My brother and I have played practical jokes on one another for the last almost 60 years. And thank goodness I don't live near him anymore, because he's really, really good at it. So maybe one of these days I'm going to do a podcast on practical jokes, and then we'll invite you back. So how can our viewers and listeners get in touch with you?
Yeah, in a couple of ways. The website is Accelerant Consultants, the plural form.com. My direct cell phone number is 317-847-6290. And my email address is gstanley@accelerantconsultants.com, and would be happy to follow up any questions that your viewers may have had as a result of the podcast, and have really enjoyed the time we've spent together. And I hope your listeners can truly take a nugget or two out that helps them run a better business.
That's it. Each time we tell them to find one thing that they can take and apply to their business today. And boy, you don't have to look very deep into this podcast to find at least one thing to go and apply to your business. So thanks, Greg. This has been wonderful. Thank you for being our guest today.
Tom, really appreciate the time. And again, hope your viewers got a little something out of it.
Absolutely. If they didn't, they weren't paying any attention. You see, I told you, the guys that were not interested in growth, that you'd now be passionate about growing by the end of this podcast. So if you are one of those folks and you were not passionate about growth and you got through this podcast, let us know if we changed your mind on that. And if we didn't, then we'll work on you one-on-one. You can find Greg Stanley at accelerantconsultants.com or on LinkedIn. And of course, as always, you can reach out to me and I will be happy to make a warm introduction for you. This is the Maximize Business Value podcast, where we give practical advice to business owners on how to build long-term sustainable value in your business. Be sure to tune in each week and follow us if you don't mind. Follow us or like us wherever you found this podcast. And don't forget to comment. We love your comments and we will respond to all of them. So until next time, I'm Tom Bronson, reminding you to develop a solid growth strategy while you maximize business value.
Thank you for tuning into the Maximize Business Value podcast with Tom Bronson. This podcast is brought to you by Mastery Partners, where our mission is to equip business owners to maximize business value so they can transition on their terms. Learn more on how to build long-term sustainable business value and get free value-building tools by visiting our website, www.masterypartners.com. That's master with a Y, masterypartners.com. Check it out.
That was perfect. I wouldn't make any changes on that.